Good morning, Idaho. Welcome to the Local Yokel Idaho podcast, where we talk about what is going on in the wonderful state of Idaho. For those tuning in for the first time, we like to have a little bit of banter before we get into the stories, but I understand if you're short on time, we have provided the timestamps in the description so you can jump straight to the stories that you're interested in. For those that stayed, welcome to the banter. I hope you all had a wonderful week. I know I keep saying it probably every week, but the weather is just amazing down here in the Treasure Valley. It just keeps getting more pretty and more nice, more greenery keeps coming out. As of recording this, we're recording it on Friday, so this will come out Sunday. I'm going to be going out with a friend to probably do some traveling around the state. It just more in the southern half, nothing kind of crazy, but I'm so looking for it because, yeah, spring weather, Idaho is amazing and nice to be out. There isn't a ton of bugs. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. And it's just pretty, especially when you get those long views where you can see all the green grass and growth that's going on. It's just gorgeous. But also something that's great is that John is joining us again today with his amazing voice to co-host with me.
I am here. I don't know if I can be compared to the wonderful scenic views of Idaho in spring, but you know, I am here. No, it is really nice though. My brother had a birthday recently, and to celebrate, he had a bunch of his family and friends get together, and we played basketball.
Ooh.
At a local park here last night, or I guess yesterday afternoon, and man, it was great. It was nice outside. It was nice and cool. I guess it wasn't cold. It was warm, but it was nice and cool, which made playing ball, running up and down an outdoor court.
Yeah, it's the perfect time of year to do those like outdoor activities because you can go and you can just exert yourself and do stuff, but then it'll be cool enough that if you stop moving for a little bit, you'll kind of cool yourself down, which is just like perfect. You can be hot if you want to, you can be cold if you want to. You have full control at that point, rather than like in the middle of summer. Your best thing is to go into AC and pray that you'll cool down, or find a body of water.
Either that or find somewhere that has misters, because that also will do it in the summer.
That is true. I've seen those more and more at like fairgrounds and stuff during the summer.
They're really awesome.
I wonder if it is actually effective or if it gives your body the illusion, because you know how many things are kind of like related to our mind, where we think, oh yeah, I'm cooler, but then you're not actually. I wonder if that's more, because like technically you're
it's legitimate because you're adding evaporative cooling to the space. So you know you're if the humidity if the base humidity level is low enough, then yeah, adding water to the system does actually lower the temperature.
Yeah, because you have that as a conductor,
right? Well, and the other, and it's, you know, it does the same thing that you sweating does, is it helps your body release heat. So
right,
yeah, no, it works. And it is wonderful. The problem is when it's too humid and then all you're doing is just adding more water, and that doesn't help at all.
Oh, the joys of living out west, right?
Yeah, right? Dude, they were awesome down in Albuquerque, where it was always close to 0% humidity. Like, oh, they were great. Except for 2 weeks. And anybody who lived in the Southwest knows you've got like 2 weeks every summer where it's just miserable.
Why?
And for some reason, it's humid for like 2 weeks.
Is there like a body of water nearby, or is it just when the weather patterns
It's
bring
just the
more
rainy
rain?
season.
Oh.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, it's wet. It's hot, humid, and miserable. Now, when I say it's humid, I mean it's, you know, all of like 20 to 30%. But if the rest of the time is like 2 to 5%, then, you know, that's like a tenfold increase. So, yeah, it's a lot, but it's nothing compared to what anyone on the East Coast or in the South would deal with.
I'm glad that most of Idaho does not have to experience that. Thankfully, on our weird weather habits list that we did last week in that segment, which if you want to go look at that, highly recommend it. Some interesting phenomenon that I didn't even know when we were researching that. Humidity is not one of them. Thankfully, most of the state of Idaho generally will stay dry. The one exception is there is areas that are more temperate. So they're like Seattle. It will get humid in the state of Idaho, but those areas usually never get above like 80 or 70. So it's like, oh yeah, it's humid, but there's something unique about like that cold, humid, that mountainous cold air humid.
Yeah, it definitely works. I like our climate here. If I didn't, I would leave like I did in Texas, where it's just hot and humid all the time.
Which one thing I am thankful for, on top of the fact that we have the dry weather here in Idaho, is all the support last week over the last couple of weeks now that we've moved to video.
Yeah.
It's been really cool to see all the views coming in from you guys and the increased retention that you guys are enjoying it and watching it. That's kind of a way for us to see. Now, if you do, the quickest way to let us know about that is to obviously leave a comment or interact with us. But I can see kind of on the data end of it that you guys are really enjoying that. We're super thankful to see that. Thank you for any of the new subscribers over the last couple of weeks now that we've gone to video. Thank you for joining. I hope you're enjoying the show and that we're able to keep you informed about stuff going on in this beautiful state. Which, another thing that we mentioned with that launch is the locals page. Think of that kind of, it's like a website, but sort of not, because I don't have the money to spend on a web developer to do that, because, web pages take time and a lot of maintenance to do. So you have to get large enough, and we're not there yet. But we have a locals page. The goal of that is to kind of centralize our stuff all in one spot. So if you're someone who doesn't want to be on Twitter, or someone who likes being on Twitter but doesn't want to be on X, Y, or Z other platform that starts with a letter of the alphabet, you can come over to our locals. It can be nice one place that will have our content plus some exclusive stuff that we're working on and doing. Right now, that's generally me messaging more direct stuff and interacting with you guys on there of just things that are going on as I'm going around Idaho and things. We're working on getting to a point to do live streams and stuff. Granted, that takes some time to figure out what do we want to do, schedules with John and other stuff. But that's another thing we're working on, plus some other really cool stuff, which you guys actually will all get to see that because we are going to be having a promo code for the next month, so about to June 1st. So from when this releases, I think it might start the Monday. Might be Monday to Sunday. Anywho, you should by this upcoming Monday here. The code should be active, and then it'll be valid until about June 1st of 2024. The code is 60 members. The reason it's that, and members is all in caps, and 60 is number, not the word, is because locals, the way that they do their program is that you don't pay for different like tiers or models or stuff. It's completely based off of your followers. So I think they have their basic tier, which we are in right now, which allows us X amount of data per month to upload. It caps our length of our live streams. Granted, we do get a lot unlimited live streams, plus a couple other caps and stuff. But if we can get above a 50 follower hold on that, then it actually allows us to do more with it. It allows us to go to over an hour, or I think at least an hour on our live streams, which is our hope. It allows us to upload more content there rather than having to link it back to YouTube and stuff. So yeah, if you guys really want to support us, independent if you don't want to give money and you just want to be there, that helps as well. But obviously, if you want to give just a little bit per month or a one-time donation, or you can just try it out with the promo code and see if it's worth it and all that, that would be super, super appreciated as we're trying to grow that for you guys and everything. So, with all that said, I know a little bit of promo stuff, but for those interested, I wanted to make sure to get that out because sometimes you put it on a Twitter post and stuff, it gets lost. But we'll move into the main part of the show now. Which, starting with our first story here, May elections, what's going on? So as we all wait for the national elections for US president in November this year, we often forget about more local elections, which can have a even more significant impact and can be even a bigger effect on you. So in this segment, we don't have enough time to cover every single race in the state, but we want to give you the resources to be well informed when you go to vote on May 21st. In this segment, we'll be breaking down the sources and resources you may need to know what's going on your ballot and to just help yourself be informed when you go to vote. So starting us off, John, how do we know kind of what's on our ballots there?
Yeah, so the first and most important part of figuring out what will be on your ballot is what district, precinct, and county you live in. The Idaho Elections Office has a really helpful website where you can go and put your address in. It'll show you your polling location for May 21st, your district, precinct, and county you live in. And once you have that, this is where things can get a little tricky. So there's a site called Ballotpedia where you can search for your address and see everything that will be on your ballot. And the link for that will be in the description or YouTube show notes or
all of these will.
That's called, right? That said, this isn't a government website. So far with our testing and checking, it has been accurate. But if you don't want to use that, you can search for your county. I'm in Ada County, so it would be Ada County 2024 May 21 election sample ballot. And you should be able to find a sample ballot on your county clerk's website. Now, If all else fails, there is also a link below to find your county clerk's contact details, which can help you get a sample ballot. So, with all that done, you now have your sample ballot. And this is where it gets a little easier. Your ballot's going to show all of the races, bills, and levies based on your district. With the number from earlier, you'll be able to determine which races you'll be able to vote on.
So first off, obviously, I'm not going to use my email for this, but to give you guys kind of an example, we're going to zoom in here of a house here somewhere. That one. Now we have this handy dandy website. You have that address, you put it in. Here it gave us the precinct, then it has the congressional district and the legislative district, and then you have your county district there. That'll be the information you'll need there. You can kind of see here, it'll also give you kind of your polling location you'll be at. So that'll kind of change depending on where you're at. Some years it's very consistent where it's at, but you do want to try to double check that leading up to that. So now you kind of have those numbers. So big thing's going to be that legislative district. So if we go back over here to Ballotpedia, I can go here. I can drop that in there to view ballots. You're going to want to select the first option. The second one's kind of weird. I think it's for primaries or stuff in the state for presidential. And then that'll actually be the full presidential one that we alluded to that we all know about for president and different stuff. But you're going to want that first option. Here you can have it as concise or detailed. I would say to go to detailed. That way, you know everything you're looking at. You can pull that up. Here again, see, so for this address, you'll have the voting option. So for the District 1, you're going to be voting for Russ Fulcher for that District 1, or not Russ Fulcher particularly, but that's one of the options. For U.S. House, then you have over here, you have Idaho Senate, but you'll have Idaho Supreme Court, a couple court approvals. So that kind of gives you an idea. Now, obviously, if this all doesn't particularly work out or you don't trust the sources on Ballotpedia, you can go and try to reach out to your county clerk that way and go actually see like a PDF. It'll be a sample one of the ballot that's going to actually be there when you go to the polling location or when you get an absentee ballot. So hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of the process to go through. Also, I think Ballotpedia, when you're looking at these things, you can click on different sections like this, and then you can get different information. I think Ballotpedia also has a little bit of a record on some of the candidates. It's kind of like Wikipedia, I think, because you have certain editors and people that manage it, but then there's also some public input that is allowed to kind of happen there. So now you have all of that detail, so you know, in theory, who's going to be running. But oftentimes, there's other things that are going on with that ballot. And you also want to do your research about those individuals. There's many different ways to skin that. You could call certain people and reach out to them to try to get those details and stuff, and they might have that for you. But we've compiled a couple resources here to kind of help you make that decision and judgment. The first one is the Idaho Freedom Foundation. They have their Freedom Index that will sit there and show you the different bills and rank. Obviously, if you lean not conservatively, granted, I feel like most of the viewers of this show are probably going to be a bit conservative. They rate kind of on that on a spending, education, and freedom. That's the third one there to kind of give an overall rating. Those ratings are not derived based on their arbitrary, but basically how they've rated other bills and how those senators have either voted yes or no or absent on those bills calculates those different scores. On their website, they can show you kind of a link below it of how that all works out. But that's a wonderful resource. Even if you don't agree with their ideology, at least it is a place that does, I think, a fairly good job. And it's one of the only ones I could find in the state that does actually show in correlation to the bills. Did they pass or not? And then did the senator vote for them? So that's your first one. The second one, there again, Ballotpedia. They have different resources. We'll have some links below. They have one search for judges to try to help with that. So you can kind of get a little bit of a background on them. There again, it may be complete or incomplete. Same with Senate and House. If you want another one there, Ballotpedia is a little bit more open source. And if you're worried about bias there from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, kind of like Wikipedia in that sense, it might be a little bit more balanced if that's what you're worried about. Obviously, there are going to be other resources, but those are the ones that I found that were the most foolproof. You're more willing to dig and look. And depending on the different angles of the political aisle, there's different groups that will give you your take on those people and their backgrounds. But those were the ones that we found that are kind of a good jumping off point, or at least ones that try to do a very good job of at least showing the way that they get to that logic, which kind of brings us into our last part and the application, which the first point I have to make, kind of going back to the Idaho Freedom Foundation for disclaimer, I do work at the Idaho Freedom Foundation as their communications coordinator. So there, you could say there's a little bit of bias there, but I would argue that since I can see that scoring system and the way that they do it there, it is very, they take it very seriously. Obviously, they haven't paid me to say that. I am saying that out on my own. I use them for my research.
The big question at this point that would come up is, well, why should we vote? And what makes a good voter? Because we hear from a lot of people, get out and vote, make your voice heard. And while that's true, I think the better question is, are you paying attention to the world around you? Do you know who you're voting for or why you're voting for who you're voting for? And probably, if you're listening to this show, you're more than likely paying attention to these things, which is good. Some of the problems come down to, though, when you're not paying attention, well, now you can run into some problems with some things. And so I think it's really good as a voter to be paying attention to what you're actually voting on and who you're voting for, and have some reasons for why you're voting for those people, whatever they are.
Right. And here again, there's a certain political gentleman that has said this in the state. For those that know him, you will instantly know the quote I'm giving, but I think it's actually a very good quote, independent of if you like the guy or not. But a lot of times in Idaho, we're a very red state with the populace. Most people would call themselves Republican in the state of Idaho. And here again, I'm not judging you on your political stance at all. But most of the times you'll see certain people that are run on the Republican platform that really aren't on the true values of that platform. And so the R really stands for research, I think is a really good way to look at it. Especially in Idaho, which is such a red state that if you can't get the R or you don't put the R on you, chances are you won't get any votes sometimes, depending on the area of the state you're in. So that would be something I would encourage people as you're doing that. Just because they have an R, please still do your research. Most of the time, if you're willing to dig or call, or let alone if you're willing to just drive, most of your different county clerks, or if you're here in the Treasure Valley, when you go down to the Capitol, will more than willingly help with you and help you look through those voting records, even if there isn't something digital online that could be fairly quick for you to be like, okay, cool. How many spending bills did they vote on? Obviously, this last session, it's going to be easier to kind of see their voting habits with the spending area, because as we looked at in our interview with Nicholas Kleinworth, they recently split those apart. So you have maintenance budgets, and then you have other budgets that actually increase that. So did they vote for only maintenance budgets, or did they vote for maintenance budgets and then try to grow certain programs and things? So that's another way it's really helpful. But most of the time, I just would encourage researching. And if there's areas where there is a lack of research, I understand with like judges, that's a really hard part. I legitimately, doing research for the segment, had a hard time really digging up some resources on that, because there's a lot of resources for House and Senate because people are really involved with that, but law things can be kind of a hard or difficult thing to kind of keep track of. But a lot of these, the best the best way to be prepared for these elections is just spend a little bit of your time being involved in them. Perfect example is city council. There's not a lot of records saved on how your city council members vote, especially online. It will be at your county or your city registry. But if you're consistently and regularly, because there's usually only one city council meeting a month, you go to those, you'll be way, way better informed. Even if you don't remember all of it, you're just like, hey, I generally didn't like the way this person voted, right? And when that time comes around, you'll be better informed. But trying to give you guys the resources so you at least know who those people are on the ballot, so you can do your due diligence. And then kind of like closing that all up, I know I'm kind of talking here for a little bit of a longer bit. Local elections are important. I know you might think, nothing big here, but if there's one part of this that is very big, and maybe you're a listener out there and you care absolutely nothing about the Idaho House and Senate because you just think they're a bunch of people squabbling over pennies. Fair enough. But I would encourage you that you have the chance right now to vote accordingly with your House representatives, which means they go to Congress in the U.S. House. And as we've seen anything, the U.S. House right now has some issues. And I think we all would love for our House representatives at the national level to represent what Idahoans truly believe and to push that forward and to stand with those that we love. I think many of us hear some of the different representatives in the House, and are like, oh, that's awesome. But wouldn't it be great if we had people like that for our own that are here from Idaho? And you have that opportunity going forward that you have elections coming up for Mike Simpson and Russ Fulcher, and you can do your due diligence on that. I obviously have my own kind of thoughts on those, but if anything else, I would recommend you go to those elections for that alone. Hey, since you made it this far, you probably enjoy the show, and that probably means you want to keep up with all things Idaho. So don't forget to hit the subscribe or follow button on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter. That way you don't miss any of our future content. And if you want to see all of our content in one place and or support us, we recommend that you check out our locals page. It is a place for all things local yokel Idaho and so much more. And also for our audio only listeners on platforms like iTunes or Spotify, please rate the show and leave us a review. Thank you for supporting us and for being part of the local yokel Idaho community. Together, hopefully we can keep Idaho informed, engaged, and involved in this wonderful state. Now, let's dive into the next story. Which this next one, Idaho's wild land variation. In the last couple of weeks, we've talked about the different growing zones in the state and how to know when to plant your garden. Last week, we talked about Idaho's crazy weather habits. But keeping with that theme, as you all know from last week, Idaho definitely has some crazy themes to its climate, but it also has some crazy changes in its geography across the state. From the towering heights of Bora Peak to the lows of the Snake River, Idaho's landscape is very varied. In this segment, we'll be looking at Idaho's extreme heights and give you an overview of the landscape and biomes across the state. So with that said, John, would you like to start off with the high points?
Yeah, so Idaho definitely has some extremes. And in terms of weather, we talked about that last week. But in terms of geography, near Stanley, we've got Bora Peak, which is the tallest point in the state at 12,662 feet above sea level. It's part of the Sawtooth Range. And for context, Denali in Alaska is the highest U.S. peak at 20,310 feet. Mount Whitney in California is 14,505, the highest in the contiguous U.S. states. But on the low end, the Snake River near Lewiston is the lowest point in the state at 710 feet. Weather there sure shows it. But height isn't everything. Idaho has a vast range of different landscapes across the state. So you've got the Panhandle, which is northern Idaho. It's characterized by rugged, heavily forested mountains, pristine lakes, and a more temperate climate influenced by the Pacific Ocean. This region is home to the North American inland temperate rainforest. This area of Idaho also has an area known as the Palouse Prairie, which is found primarily in north-central Idaho around the Palouse region. These areas were once covered in perennial bunch grasses and wildflowers, but much of the original prairie has been converted to agriculture now. However, there are still some areas that provide examples of it. So that was northern. Then you've got central, and central Idaho is dominated by the Rocky Mountains, including the Sawtooth Range, the Lost River Range, and the Salmon River Mountains. These areas feature jagged peaks, alpine lakes, and coniferous forests. The Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness, located in this region, is one of the largest contiguous wilderness areas in the continental U.S. And then moving all the way down to southern Idaho, this is where most of us call home. It's characterized by the Snake River Plain, a wide arc-shaped valley that extends from the Wyoming border in the east to the Oregon border in the west. This area is known for its fertile farmland, sagebrush, steppe, and high desert landscapes. The Craters of the Moon National Monument and Preserve and most of Idaho's potato farmland are located in this area.
Right, which, thankfully I've had the joy of seeing a lot of it. Honestly, I kind of filled out the last of that a week or two ago when I went with a friend over there to the Sawtooth area. That was one area I just had not been through now, but I have been. But the surprising part actually about that area is it's quite close, which we talked about that a little bit in our weather conversation me and John went through. But obviously you can go more in depth in all these areas, but we wanted to give you guys an overview of places to start. There's so many parts of Idaho that even me growing up and now that I'm doing the show and realizing or going out with my grandparents that I never knew existed. Perfect example of that is the inland rainforest up north in northern Idaho. I know my family has been, I have not to that specific area where you'll have cypress and it's green and it's fern-like and it almost looks like something over in Oregon or Washington from the photos I've seen. I myself have not gone. But it is something that's really pretty to see, and some people just don't know about it. And so we wanted to talk about that and kind of give an overview, plus kind of going with the current theme of getting to know certain parts of Idaho. I will admit the area over there that it's talking about that used to be all wildfires and plains. Don't fret too much. Definitely, it's sad that that period is gone, but all that agricultural land, when it's all with canola or wheat or something, especially the wheat, it's probably green this time of year. It is also equally very, very pretty to see these big swaths of area that are lush and green and rolling. And then you have this pine coming out of it, which for any of us in the southern part of the state is kind of weird. The idea of having pines and farmland next to each other just kind of doesn't mix because you're usually used to being up in McCall. And it's like, okay, the plants, the farmland's at the bottom and then the pines are on the side, but the two don't interact. They're separate. They're separate.
Yeah, it's interesting when you get to those areas where things are just weird.
Right. It's super unique. Same there again with the Craters of the Moon. When I drove through there with my friend, there was a bit of snow on it, and so it was weird to see bits of it. That's like, oh, that looks like the moon. Oh, wait a second, there's snow. There shouldn't be snow on the moon. That doesn't seem right.
That's funny.
So it's very pretty, and there's a lot of it that is very close, especially if you're in the Treasure Valley, or even if you're on the other side of things over there in Pocatello and Idaho Falls. Crater of the Moon is very close. There again, that Stanley Mackey area with that tallest peak there, Bora Peak. Super close there again to go drive to. I say super close. For me, super close is a 2-hour drive. I know for some people that's insanity. For all you Boise people, shame on you. More than 15 minutes is accomplishable. I know it's hard, but you can do it.
Yeah, those of us here in the city, we don't like going very far if we don't have to.
Yes. Yeah. And then equally so for all the people on the western part of the valley here, inside baseball for anyone not listening from the Treasure Valley, people on the west end of the valley and Caldwell and stuff, like, oh, I can't remember the last time I was in Boise. I don't like to drive that far. I'm like, what? When there's no traffic on the freeway, you could get from downtown Caldwell to downtown Boise in almost 25 minutes. It's not that long.
Yeah, it's not that long, but it's definitely a hike still.
Oh, come on.
I'm just saying. It's true. It is.
In the space of time, you can barely get through a podcast in that amount of time.
Yeah.
You're just wetting your whistle at that point.
It's still a decent amount of time. I'm not going to lie. It is.
Fair enough. I, on the flip side, am very guilty that I do drive a lot on top of having to do stuff for the show and researching, but then also for work because I usually commute from Boise to Caldwell. So my perspective of a short drive is, oh, cool. We did it in 20 minutes. It didn't take 40. It was half of that. That's super nice. Or if it's a casual drive, then a casual's 2 hours. But if you're talking really serious, then yeah, you're doing 4 hours on and 4 hours off.
Yeah. The funny thing is back east where I lived when I was growing up, and we lived out there a couple of years, anything longer than 30 to 40 minutes is a really long time, unless you're in one of the big cities, and then anything shorter than an hour is really short. So, I lived about 2 hours west of Washington, D.C., and there were a lot of people that commuted into D.C. from the town we lived in.
I can't even imagine how bad that is now that I've had to park in downtown Boise a couple times.
Oh, it blows my mind. And a lot of those people, they commute to the metro station, and then you ride the DC Metro, which is their bus and subway system, into the city from there. So you drive, you park, you ride, and then you get to work. And it's a whole process. And I know New York is the same way. There was an office at the last, one of the engineering firms I've worked at. We had an office in Minneapolis, and that place was the same way. Denver's the same way. But yeah, you get outside of those big cities, and out here in the West, you got to drive for a while to get anywhere. And it's normal.
Yeah. Someone that's grown up in it.
Yeah. My wife's folks live down in Colorado Springs, and
nice.
We talk about driving down there. It's only 13 hours.
Right.
It's not that bad. That's a 1-day drive.
Right. Especially very pretty when you go down there through the fall time.
Honestly, go either way and it's pretty. You go down south through Utah. It's awesome. You go east through Wyoming, and that's awesome too. Like it's just really cool. I really like driving out here.
Oh yeah. And I will admit, on touching on that part with New York, the thing that blows my mind, and it's also, when I say this, is probably the reason why you can get your driver's license in Idaho. I think it's like at 14 or 16 or something like that. Is the idea of people living most of their lives, those that grew up in New York, and I've heard it, that are just like, yeah, I don't have a driver's license. I've never had a driver's license. I don't know how to drive a
Hmm.
car. And I'm like, how do what? that if
Yep. It
even
does
before I
not
got my
compute.
driver's license, I rode my bike a ton, but I knew how to drive a car. Like if you sat there and maybe I'm out on a friend's farm and they need me to drive the stick shift or the truck or something, right? I could do that and it'd be fine. And it's on their property and I'm not on the main road, so yeah, who cares about license at that point? Um, but I could do that even though I didn't have a license. But the idea of just being like, one, I don't have a driver's license. Two, I have absolutely no starting point. That for me as an Idahoan just blows my mind because you can see even kids sometimes at ages that they shouldn't have any right to be driving it. Dad's like, all right, you're gonna drive the truck so I can unload the hay for the cattle or
Yep.
something, and they're just like, oh yeah, I know how to drive.
Yeah, because you learned when you were a child, and it is what it is. It's not a big deal. Yeah, driving. I don't know. Driving's always been one of those things that wasn't a big deal for me or the house we grew up in. Like it was just a thing that we did.
Yeah,
Honestly, I attribute some of that to video games. Playing driving games. Mario Kart being chief among them. You learn how to move around in a vehicle. And then, the riding lawnmower and friends with go-karts and things like
right.
that. Like anything you get in that moves, it helps. So yeah, when I was going through driver's ed, I remember it not being a big deal.
I will admit, I know we're getting sidetracked a little bit, but this is something that I find fascinating is that when I was learning to drive for me, I had driven a lot of other vehicles. And cars, in my opinion, are very unique. Now bear with me with this idea. When you drive
Okay.
an ATV, when you take your finger off the throttle, usually it's a finger throttle, some of them have a foot throttle, but most of them are a finger throttle. They instantly kind of slow down very quickly. Like, you have a brake, but sometimes you don't use it a lot, especially if you have a four-wheeler that's in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
Similar thing there again. If you're driving a boat, there's not a brake. The brake is putting the throttle off. You just you slow
Yep.
down.
Yep.
So a lot of things you really don't brake a lot. Same with a bicycle. Yes, there are brakes, but most of the time you're coasting to your stop. But when I was driving a car, I had to realize, okay, I have to consciously think about braking. Every other vehicle, I have not had to, and also every other vehicle, you interact with it with your hands.
Yeah.
With a car, it's one of the few things that we don't. Maybe a motorcycle being the exception to a certain degree, but it's one of those few things that everything about the movement almost of that car is done with your feet. You don't do that with a bicycle, I
Yeah.
guess maybe because you're pedaling, but not totally. With a boat, you're not doing it. You don't have a foot throttle. Most of them, ATV, you don't have a foot throttle to it. And it's kind of fascinating how that has all worked out. That everyone's just like, oh yeah, it's normal for a car. Everything else that's weird. Don't make me use my feet for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how that works. I was talking to my kids the other day. So one of the the car that we own. So we have a big 15 passenger van, and then we have a little car, and the car is a manual transmission. And I've got a motorcycle that I was using to commute while I was working downtown. Because of course, if you're in Boise, there's free parking downtown in the big parking garages for motorcycles. So ride your motorcycle to work and you get free parking downtown. It's great. Anyway, so I was talking to the kids about the manual transmission, and I was like, we're talking about what your hands and your feet are doing and how they all work together, and then talking about how, if you're on an incline, it can be tough because you have to mess with the pedals and stuff. And I was like, and this is why a motorcycle is oh so much easier to get going, because you have a handbrake
Right.
and your throttle, or no, you have a foot brake and your throttle and your clutch. Instead of on a car, you have 2 feet for your brake, your clutch, and your throttle.
Right.
And so you have to do that dance with your feet. On a motorcycle, it's just you have 3 different contact points and you're good to go. It's super easy.
Which the funny thing is, I'm actually remembering this right now, is that the most popular car in history, which is the Ford Model T. Fun fact: at one point in history, 2/3 of every automobile on Earth was a Ford Model T on
Yep.
Earth, which still blows my brain. But anywho, the throttle for that is on the steering wheel. So it
makes
wasn't
sense.
always the case. I don't know why. Someone in the comments might put that down there if we include this. I don't know. This might get scrubbed. But it is something that's fascinating. But I guess coming back to the landscape part of it, which you do need to drive to get to a lot of it. I know a lot of people also like
Yep.
to see a lot more of it with dual sport bikes. Dual sport meaning it's kind of an in-between of bikes. You can kind of go in the backcountry. I just consider them the mechanical horse of the modern age. But you can take them out and people really enjoy it. But there's so much variation. And if you ever are sitting there and you're like, oh man, I'm bored, or you're trying to figure out why I don't know, maybe you have issues where the kids aren't wanting to interact with stuff, just go out in God's beautiful creation. It could be as simple as you drive somewhere and you go walk and hike, or drive somewhere, get some food and come back. But Idaho just has so much to offer and a ton of variation that I feel bad if some people, especially on road trips, they probably only travel through the more southern half of here on I-84. And they probably think Idaho is just one big desert with some mountains over to the right, when there's so much beauty to be seen, let alone all the hot springs around the state.
Yeah, that is definitely a thing you get when you drive around western states, as they're so big and they encompass so many different
Biomes, landscapes.
themes, landscapes, geographies, climates, temperatures. I mean, we haven't done a lot of exploring in Idaho yet, but I've done a lot of exploring in my life in and around the Rocky Mountains, up in upstate Montana and all the way down to New Mexico. Shoot, all the way down into Mexico, along that path. And, there's just so much cool stuff and so much varied everything. So I'm excited to do more exploring of Idaho and, get further north and further east and just, I don't know, check it all out. It's a really cool place. I'm really glad we live here.
Oh yes, we're all very thankful. And I know many other people are looking to be part of that crowd, but that's another issue to try to figure out. But hopefully me and John will be able to record those experiences as we do get to explore more of the state, and we're working on some cool projects there. Which, sadly, we've come to the end of the episode. Thank you for listening to the entire show. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us by email at lyimedia@protonmail.com or on Twitter by tweeting us at localyocalidaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.